All right, it is 11:30 a.m. Eastern Time, so let's get started. Welcome to the second day of Capstone peer review presentations for the second spring term of 2023. I'm Jim Detweiler, the faculty lead for the Geospatial Programming Certificate. For those who don't know me, I'll be the MC for today. We have 4 presentations lined up. First, a few reminders. Presenters, you're going to have 25 minutes to give your talk, followed by 5 minutes of questions. Audience members, if you have a question for a presenter, please enter it into the chat box. You might consider typing your question into a separate text editor and then copying and pasting it into the chat box when the presenter wraps up so that you don't distract them during their talk. Presenters, please read the question out loud so that anyone watching the recording will know what you're responding to. And students in the capstone, we're expecting you to provide each speaker with some constructive feedback. Others who are attending are invited to do so also. I've already posted a link to the peer review form in the chat box. I'll paste it in there again later as we go along. We're going to have a couple of geodesign MPS students leading off. Starting with Daniel Hoffman, who's going to talk to us about climate resiliency strategies. Daniel, are you set to go?
Yes. Oh, I need to share my screen. It's been disabled.
Oh, 1 second.
Yeah.
All right, you should be able to do it now.
Okay, great. Okay, everyone see drought and deluge?
Looks good.
Okay, perfect. Okay, well, thank you everybody for listening to my talk today about my capstone project regarding climate resiliency in an area of California called Central Valley. Okay, here we go. So kind of what I'm going to go over today, a little bit about me and why I'm here. I'm going to talk about my research question and provide some context, and that includes a little bit of background about geodesign and some of the sustainability goals at various levels. I'm going to talk about the region of the Central Valley, kind of the landscape and how it functions, and is it functioning well. I'm going to dive in deeper to my study area and what I'm going to propose, and also some anticipated stakeholder concerns, and then end it with next steps. A little bit about me. I'm a map nerd. I love geography. Began my love affair with GIS 28 years ago as an undergrad at Humboldt State University. Studied a lot of forestry and natural resources up there. And the past 24 years, I've been working for an urban planning department in Los Angeles County. And as part of what attracted me to geodesign is there's a lot of overlap between GIS and urban planning. So my basic research question is, how can we apply sustainability and climate resiliency goals at multiple scales of an area using geodesign? Most of you on the call at least have heard about geodesign and probably know basically what it is, but I'm just going to really briefly talk about it. It was developed by a professor at Harvard named Carl Steinitz. One of his students was Jack Dangermond, who started a little company called Esri, which you probably have heard of. And if you look at the diagram on the right, this is what geodesign is. It's a framework for, if you're designing a project in an area, it's a framework for assessing the landscape, because your project is a part of a larger range of systems and landscapes that you need to analyze and take into account. So each of these models that you iterate through asks you questions like, where's the study area? What are the economic geographies and social geographies? And how does it work? Is it working well? What's the change going to be, and what's the impact going to be? And then the decision, who's going to be involved in the decisions on those impacts, and what's the most important? And that's where the stakeholders come in. And the stakeholders and the people of the place, they have to be involved in the design process and the decision process, because you're designing in a place where they live. So that's kind of what we like to say about geodesign. It's data informed. GIS is a big part of the engine of geodesign, but it's decision driven. So talking about some of the sustainability goals is kind of a whole universe of them. One of the problems with the Central Valley is groundwater availability. So if you look at the lower left, there's a groundwater sustainability plan. Well, that's a part of, what's showing on the lower right, which is kind of this constellation of state laws and vision and executive orders and that sort of thing, regarding global warming, reduction of greenhouse gases, using nature-based solutions in green infrastructure to make your communities and landscapes more climate resilient. And then that relates to national priorities of tackling climate change, and further relates to UN sustainability goals. And there was actually recently a whole summit at the UN just about water resiliency. So there are disagreements about how severe climate change is and what we need to do, but this is a priority from the globe on down to the local level that's not going away and that we have to take into account. So some of my goals and objectives of this project, applying the geodesign framework, addressing these issues, analyzing the landscape at both a watershed scale and at a local jurisdiction scale, visualizing the changes to these landscape processes and what the impact will be. And ultimately, how are we going to implement these kind of big vision statements and state laws and things like that? How are we going to implement these strategies, specifically from the state level? So this is the Central Valley. What you see in this beige color in the middle of the state, that's kind of this geologic landform of alluvial erosion that's happened from the surrounding mountains. So on the east, you have the Sierra Nevada mountains, and on the west, you have the coastal ranges. It's a primarily flat valley, just surrounded by all these mountains. And a lot of the watersheds drain into the Pacific through San Francisco. So those are the top two water basins there. And the lower water basin, the low point of that is Tulare Lake. And that's where the natural water processes, empty into. But as I'll show, this landscape is severely altered, and that includes the water system itself. So these are some of the problems of the area. So what you see with these blue lines here, what looks like a river system, is actually all the artificial canals and aqueducts and pipelines throughout the area, throughout the entire Central Valley. The agricultural land use in the valley has just exploded since, after the gold rush in the 1800s, and has grown so big that this huge diversionary infrastructure from all the natural water flows had to be built to sustain this. But part of our climate is drought. It's a regular occurrence. It's not a freak of nature. We have a pattern of drought and deluge. We have a lot of drought, regular occurring drought years, and we have years where we have a lot of rain, like we had this past year. So because of the drought, there's just not enough surface water available. So what's happened is that there's been a lot of groundwater drilling and extraction that's been needed to maintain this huge agricultural system. And what you see in these coral colored polygons here, kind of in the San Joaquin Valley in the south, those are the impaired groundwater basins. They're critically overdrafted. And these are the areas that are mandated by the state to develop groundwater sustainability plans in order to address this imbalance, because there's a lot of land subsidence. It impacts the surrounding communities that have drinking water wells, because the aquifers drain those out sometimes, and pollution and the like. There's also a lot of environmental justice issues. So the data you see in the map on the right, this comes from CalEnviroScreen, which is a state-tailored environmental justice scorecard, basically. So it measures the negative environmental impacts versus sensitive populations, and those could be populations that have a lot of aging population and, asthma issues, and that's linguistic isolation and that sort of thing. And if you look at the top scoring environmental justice areas, almost all the Sacramento or San Joaquin Valley is falling under this category. And so the major issues in the Central Valley is air pollution, drinking water quality, pesticide use, and linguistic isolation. So these are the drought monitor maps. This is where we were in December 2022. And in the graph on the bottom, you see kind of the regular occurring patterns of drought and that they've been getting more intense. And here's where we are today. So great, no more drought, right? In a sense, that's true. We've got a ton of rain. We had these atmospheric river storms that have just one after the other hit California, gave us a lot of snowpack, which is great. Unfortunately, there's 200% or more snowpack in the Sierra Nevada mountains, and all that's going to come down into the valley this year. It's already been happening. So the attraction of this area, of course, is agriculture. That's the main economy. That's the main lifestyle. So the darker green areas are the croplands that have a lot of really good soil, that are the most economically valuable crops throughout the state. And, then we have, the lighter green areas, which are also important cropland, but maybe not as good soil and that sort of thing. And then the surrounding areas, kind of in the foothills of all the mountains, there's a lot of grazing land. And the red areas show the, cities and urban areas. And, it's a $42 billion industry estimated. And these are the major crops here. And some of these crops, like almonds and pistachios, use a lot of water. So that's another issue, that we're dealing with. And this is the vulnerability. These are the floodplains mapped out by FEMA. I've kind of generalized it into one category. But, essentially the Central Valley is naturally a floodplain. All this snow melt and rainwater percolates down from all the mountains into here. And this is part of what makes this region so attractive for agriculture is, all the minerals that have eroded down into the valley have created this really rich soil over all the millennia. But, we have flooding. So in 1862, we had a series of atmospheric river storms, a lot of snowpack, and a big heat event that melted everything almost all at once. And you can see in the bottom screenshot, people getting in their boats in the state capitol to commute to work. And this is a similar situation we're having now. Now, back then, they didn't have all the flood control sorts of things we have now, but nonetheless, it's still a threat. So in geodesign, we look at areas of attraction and areas of vulnerability, and the intersection between the two are the areas of risk. So obviously, a lot of cropland is subjected to this flooding, although ironically, that also presents an opportunity, which I'll get to later. But you can also see the red areas. There's significant population areas like Fresno and Stockton and Visalia that are at risk for flood. And these are just the floodplains mapped by FEMA. I mean, they can be more extensive, also given the fact that storms are getting more intense now too. So it might actually be bigger than this. Now, what's happening now in this water basin is the Tulare Lake, which you see in the middle, is refilling. So that was an area that was a lake that was drained by 1900, for all this diversion for agricultural use. And the Tulare Lake dry lake bed is actually being used for agriculture, growing a lot of cotton and tomatoes there and such. But we've had so much rain and so much snow melt that it's percolating down and the water system can't handle it all. So it's all like that's the lowest point in the water basin. So it's refilling. And so the towns of Alpa and Allensworth have had flooding, and Corcoran, which is a city of 20,000 people, there's literally one levee protecting it from all this flood water in this basin. So now you'll see the area in the watershed in crosshatch to the north of the lake. That's my study area. That's the watershed I chose. So this is the Coal Slough Kings River watershed. And it empties a lot of the upper watersheds of the Sierra Nevadas. There's a dam there, which you see Pine Flat Lake up in kind of the northern part there. It's used for managing all the floodwaters and hydroelectricity and that sort of a thing. And I mentioned I'm going to look at two different scales. I'm also going to look at the city of Parlier within this watershed. Now, in a geodesign study, we're going to propose changes, but we also have to know what changes are coming. And so there's a lot of them. You know, we've got the high-speed rail under construction, which has actually been halted in this area because of all the flooding. And from that high-speed rail, we got two kind of rail stops, and one in Fresno and one just off the map in Hanford, which is south of here. So those hubs will have an impact on the growth of these surrounding areas. We got a master plan community in the northern part of this watershed, and the city south of Parlier, Kingsburg, they're growing as well. And what you see in this red crosshatch area around the city of Parlier, that's their sphere of influence, and that's their projected growth area, which is here. So the city is in crosshatch. That's the existing city boundary now. It's mostly built out, but they are doing some revitalization projects or putting a new industrial park in. So there's a lot of projects here. But what you see in the different colors expanding out, that's the future land use plan. So as you can see, there's a lot of projected residential growth. The city wants to grow. So how do we accommodate that? And just so you know, my capstone project is not an official one I'm doing for the city. Rather, it's a visualization of what it could look like if we take into account climate resiliency strategies. So one of these could be an agri-hood. This is think of like a golf course community, right? But instead it's cropland within it. So it's kind of a residential agricultural hybrid. This is a visualization from the city of Santa Clara in California. It's more sustainable. It has a lot more green infrastructure, more permeable soil that'll seep back into the groundwater and the aquifers. And this could be an asset, an attraction for the city that wants to attract people to come and settle here. And it's also an attraction for the local economy as well, because it's centered around these community gardens and farmers markets and things like that. Kind of at a more regional level is this, this idea of managed aquifer recharge through crop flooding. That just rolled off the tongue. This is a voluntary action. It's not mandated by the state, but it's being studied by the state. This is where you can volunteer in times of deluge, like we had, and we have a lot of snow melt and flooding that's happening. In these years, you can volunteer to have your crops flooded, and then that flooding will percolate into these groundwater aquifers, and it'll also mitigate for stormwater. So you're taking stress off the river, and then downstream you'll have less flooding, like we're having in Tulare Lake right now. Now, the potential risk of this is activating toxins, the pesticides on the plants and this fertilizer nitrates in the soil. Once these toxins get into the groundwater, it's hard, if not impossible, to extract them. So is it a reasonable risk to take given the benefits? But there's already a lot of momentum happening with this activity. So part of this capstone is kind of looking at this holistically. And another exciting thing is paleo valleys. These are underground rivers, basically, during the last ice age, when all the glaciers melted. All that intense floodwater just scoured the Central Valley and created these really deep river plains. And then over the millennia, that got filled over with erosion and soil. But these underground channels still exist, and they're very permeable. So the hope is that they can be kind of like super highways for recharging these aquifers, and then the really deep aquifers as well. So I'm going to do stakeholder outreach in my project, but based on my research, these are some of the comments that I could foresee happening. Yeah, the positive ones are obvious. Yay, more nature-based solutions, making your communities more climate resilient. But some of the concerns that could come up is, gosh, it's hard to navigate all of these regulations and departments that manage all this water. And then we're adding more regulations on top of that. So that's an issue for farmers. And maybe there's not enough financial incentives to farm differently. So if we're doing regenerative or organic farming techniques, that's not as productive economically for your cropland. So that's something to consider. So we need to consider the economic environment as well. All right, last few slides here. So again, we're taking these vision statements, from the UN and the nation and the state, but also like a vision statement for this watershed. How to create more climate resilient communities using nature-based solutions. Strategies on doing that is manage flooding, bringing surface water and groundwater into balance, and then some tactics are a mix of green infrastructure and gray infrastructure like canals, concrete built things, because we might need to build some ground infrastructure to target some of these recharge areas, especially these paleo valleys if they get mapped. And at a local jurisdiction level, we want to create an attractive destination, a place to settle, a thriving landscape for our city. How do we do that? Well, there's unique ways you can plan for your residential uses in the future. Maybe it's a hybrid approach. We also want to have stormwater enhancements and groundwater recharge capabilities and such. So these are some of the specific actions you can take. And then lastly, the tools I'm going to use, ArcGIS Pro for the more heavy lifting in terms of all the geoprocessing and data management. GeoPlanner is a great tool for geodesign. You can design and see the impacts and set key performance indicators and goals, and you get instant feedback on that. And then that can be shared into web maps and then ArcGIS Online environment for people for the stakeholders to look at and comment on. And then a story map. One of my geodesign colleagues did his whole capstone as a story map. So I think I would like to do the same sort of thing. So those are kind of the main tools that I'm going to be using in my study. And with that, that is my presentation. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Daniel.
Okay.
Questions for Daniel?
Hi, Dan. Great presentation, very good overview of the process and of your project. I really especially like the series of maps that you put together to actually tell that story. Extremely effective. Could you prioritize possibly your goals for your study area? You listed a number of visions, but ultimately, what do you want to accomplish? What priority of change do you want to achieve here?
I guess one of the main priorities is, flood mitigation. I mean, if we're talking about climate resilient communities, and we're talking about climate change, and the geography of this area is such that it is a floodplain, and that we're going to get worse storms. And, government is supposed to protect property, is supposed to protect people. So I would say, mitigating for flood, in these kind of upstream communities, especially, for the lower points of the watershed, that probably should be the priority. Now, and from that it's a multi-benefit sort of thing. There's ecological restoration that can happen with that, and we've got the floodplains from FEMA. These are kind of the target areas for, doing this sort of activity. But I think in terms of just the danger and the hazard in this area, I think flood mitigation would be the probably biggest priority. Now, I'm somehow not seeing the chat, so I don't see if there's any typed questions in here.
There aren't yet, so I'll go next. I also thought you did an excellent job, especially in terms of your graphics. I thought they were really quite well done. You were talking about, or you mentioned the term sphere of influence, and I know what that means in a more generic sense, but it seemed like it had a sort of official, specific meaning, maybe a legislative meaning. Could you address that?
Yeah, so I honestly don't know all the details, but it's essentially, like in California, each jurisdiction, each city jurisdiction has a sphere of influence areas. And, as a city grows, it has to go through an annexation process. And, that's a whole thing with stakeholders and people getting involved there. But these are kind of legislatively determined boundaries that a city will eventually grow to. Now, I don't know specifically what the timeline is for that in terms of the city of Parlier, but yeah, so this is kind of, and you could also, legislatively, change your sphere of influence too, and Parlier recently did that. So it's kind of like a boundary where, the city is going to grow eventually, and there is some legislative meaning behind that. And so that's, it's kind of like a planning sort of a thing.
Right. Gotcha. Thank you. Looks like you do have a question in the chat box now.
I do see that. As a former farmer in Bakersfield, my well was approximately 85 feet deep. San Joaquin Valley is rich with petroleum, many wells. Is there concerns with recharge and permeability issues with water contamination? Yeah, for sure. I mentioned, the pesticides and kind of the legacy nitrates that are in the soil from all the historic, tilling of the land and farming that's been done. So that is an issue. And that graphic I showed from the state, that was mentioned in that big document, that is a concern. Yeah, and I know most of the oil wells and such, there's a lot in Bakersfield and Kern County. There's not as much in my area. So I'm thinking that's what you were asking, like specifically about petroleum, but I have not considered petroleum specifically as a contaminant. So, I'll definitely look at that. Okay, well, we got 2 minutes if anyone has a quick question. I know that was a lot of stuff I threw at you. It's a complex area.
Looks like you've got a new one from Alicia in the chat.
Okay, how can communities, especially love, yeah, the AgriHood, I got to credit Alicia for that. We did that on another class project. Are you planning to do any community engagement with this study? Yes, I am. Whether it's probably going to be through some kind of ArcGIS online tool. I have been starting to do some outreach with the city and some conservation groups, but yes, definitely, I do want them to be a part of, this design process. And there's a lot of great ArcGIS online tools to do that. I am planning on going up there too, but some of this stuff I'm going to have to do remotely. So, yeah, great questions. Thank you, everybody.
Any other questions for Daniel?
Thank you.
Okay, well, yeah, nice job, Daniel. I look forward to seeing how your project turns out, seeing the results when you're all done.
Great.
Next up, we have another geodesign presentation from Alicia Lorber, who's going to talk to us about a trail feasibility study.
Hi, everybody. I am going to try to share my screen. Looks like I can do that. Can you guys all see this okay?
Looks good.
You hear me okay?
Sounds good.
Oh, this is the wrong slide. Hold on. Okay. Back at the beginning. So thank you, everybody. I am so excited to be here. It's been a long journey. Ann and I have been, I like to say co-conspirators, but collaborators on several projects in the past. So it was really great to see his presentation. So my name is Alicia Lorber. I am going to be sharing with you my capstone project proposal today. I'm a landscape architect and I'm a Penn State alumni. I actually was classmates with David Goldberg, so it's been a while. And I'm really happy to be back at Penn State. Some people have a midlife crisis and they buy a fancy car. I went back to grad school. So I work for a company called Mead and Hunt, and this project is a real project that I'm working on with Charles County Department of Planning, which is an area in Maryland. And there's a lot of tricky issues to navigate. So a little bit about what I'm going to be presenting today. I'm going to go through a little bit of the project background and history, and then talk about the goals or the purpose and need. And then I'm going to review the methods plan and the geodesign process and how we're using this process to do the trail feasibility study, and then talk about the next steps. So first, to orient you all, if you're not familiar with Charles County, Maryland, it is south of Washington, D.C., close to the very southernmost tip of Maryland. It has lots of waterfront along the Potomac River, which is tidal in this area. And this area is the southernmost tip of Charles County. It's very rural. And with it being a waterfront, there's also a lot of nice waterfront homes. Cobb Neck is a peninsula that kind of sticks out into the Potomac River. And at the very tip of that peninsula is an area where we're looking to put in a new greenway trail. So a little bit about the project. This wasn't a project that was my idea. It wasn't a project that was the idea of Charles County. This is a project that really came from the community. It's community driven, and there are some really active project boosters is what I like to call them. So the Cobb Island Citizens Association, the Swan Point Property Owners Association, and the Southern Maryland Heritage Consortium have all been working towards making this project happen since 2016, and maybe even earlier than that. And so they got the attention of the Charles County Commissioners, and it is now advanced to become a feasibility study. And that's what I'm working on. The result of the feasibility study is going to be a final recommendation for a trail alignment, a concept design, cost estimate, and an implementation plan with support from the community, we hope. If there's no public consensus, or if the project is too costly, then the trail will be considered not feasible. And that is on the table at this point. We don't know yet what our answer is going to be. We had a kickoff meeting with local stakeholders in February of this year, and we have started doing some of the analysis already. So some of the goals of this project, and these are goals that came from the community members, and the county is very supportive of them. The idea is to connect across the tip of the peninsula. It was really important to community members to be able to have access to Southern Park, which is a park in the middle, and it's underutilized. It's an underutilized park that is sort of off the beaten path. The idea is that this greenway trail can connect the local communities, provide recreational amenities, improve pedestrian and bicycle safety, because there's really not anywhere for people to walk or bike safely in this area. It's very rural. The streets are, rural highways. we would like to provide recreational amenities and encourage tourism. There is a good bit of summer tourism here with marinas and crab houses and summer homes or rental homes on the waterfront. And so we're looking at ways to provide recreational amenities, but also a place for people to really enjoy nature, because it's very rural and it's very undeveloped. We see the users being people of all ages and all abilities, which is not something that you can accommodate on the existing street network today, because they're mostly just accommodating cars. So we really want a space for pedestrians, bicyclists, even electric bikes, skaters. There's a guy who wants to use his elliptico and maybe even golf carts. And there is a golf course in the vicinity. But people also like to sort of drive around the communities in their golf carts. So let's talk a little bit about the geodesign process. I know some of the folks in the audience here are familiar with it. I don't want to give a whole deep explanation, but I sort of have my nickel explanation is that geodesign is the integration of technology and geospatial mapping tools with the planning process. But ultimately, it is a planning process that uses technology and geospatial modeling tools. And with any planning process, you don't know the outcome until you go through the analysis that will lead you to your answer. And so that is how the process works. The geodesign process, as described by Carl Steinitz, starts with the representation model, where you really look at where's our study area and what are the existing conditions. And then you go to a process model, which I equate to really looking at the opportunities and constraints, or a SWOT analysis, which stands for strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. And then from there, you identify, what can be done, what are your requirements, and how are you going to measure success? And then you go into a change model, which I equate to developing concept plans and concept designs, different alternatives, because one concept design usually isn't enough if you're really exploring all of the options. Rarely is there one concept design. And then you go to an impact model, which is when you really measure the performance using those metrics that you established earlier and see, how are these comparing to each other and what might be the best concept design. And then finally, a decision model is where you make a recommendation. And for this, we're going to be recommending what our trail location and design should be. Existing landscape, I do have a web link to a map that I can put in the chat in a minute. But there are a lot of significant environmental resources here, and it's going to require, it's a lot of constraints that we have to work around, a lot of sensitive resources that require a lot of permitting and coordination. To start with, we have what's called the Chesapeake Bay Critical Areas. That is a regulated area that is 1,000 feet from tidal waters in Maryland. And there's a lot of stringent design requirements for environmental sensitivity when you're that close to tidal waters. And we also have tidal wetlands within the areas that we're looking to put a trail, and non-tidal wetlands, including forested non-tidal wetlands. We have FEMA floodplains, forests. There are a couple of conservation easements. We also have active farmland and a lot of private property. And so this trail is likely going to impact private property. So let's take a little look around the area so you guys can kind of visualize what this looks like. So Swan Point is the far, the one tip on the west side of the peninsula. It is a country club community with a very nice golf course and tennis courts and very nice homes along the waterfront. This community are one of the communities that are really actively pushing for this trail project. The area is not fully built out. There's a lot of forested areas that is planned for future phases of development, which may or may not happen depending on the real estate market. It has been kind of stagnant for a while. So there's a lot of space that we could potentially put a trail through. We also have a really beautiful waterfront. Maryland's waterfronts are just exquisite. But a lot of that waterfront is private property. A lot of people have their private boat docks. And then, of course, a lot of it is very sensitive tidal marshlands, which are hard to build something through. We have a couple of communities like Matthews Manor and Potomac View, which are neighborhoods kind of in the middle of the tip of the peninsula. And again, it's a pretty rural area. It's very low density. Some of the homes are very small and working class. And then some of the homes are very large vacation homes. Southern Park, this is what Southern Park looks like. It's in the middle of the tip of that peninsula. It is a waterfront park. It's got a nice little fishing pier. What you see over here is the tip of another neighborhood called Potomac View that we just looked at. In fact, I'm going to go to the previous slide. Right here is the tip of this peninsula, and across the water here is Southern Park. And then over here is Southern Park, and across the water here is Potomac View. It is an underutilized park. It's off the beaten path. Not a lot of people go there. There's very little activity. And sometimes when there is activity, you kind of wonder if it's suspect. And this is what the area looks like a little bit further east of Southern Park. There's a lot of farmland and some homes along the waterfront. It's very rural. And then finally to the tip is it brings you over to Cobb Island. Cobb Island is a residential community with over 100 homes. About half of those homes are vacation rentals. And on the way to Cobb Island, there's a couple of marinas and crab houses. And there's a bridge that is the terminus of our trail study area. So with our project, we've done a lot of analysis, but we really need to do public engagement because there are people who will be directly impacted or indirectly impacted in a variety of different ways for this project. And not everybody is completely on board yet. A lot of the project boosters are not the people who live in the middle that are more likely to be impacted. So we're going to be doing a community engagement campaign. We'll be launching a story map website that goes through project background, purpose, goals, has some maps of the area, and also different alignment locations and facility typologies, which I'll show you very soon. We're going to be making informational flyers that are distributed to every property owner that would be adjacent to the trail or any of the trail alignments that we're looking at. And will be posted through listservs and Nextdoor and things like that. We're going to have a pop-up event, which is basically my way of saying a fun public meeting. For any public engagement, it's important that you go to where the people are. And it's sometimes it's really difficult to get people to come to you when a public meeting. And when we talk about public engagement and public meetings, this is something that I do professionally, and I don't even like to go to public meetings. So make it fun. So we're planning to do a pop-up event at the park where we have an ice cream truck and some games like cornhole and stuff like that. But we also are going to have a project information booth. And we're going to advertise this event as a fun event, but you can come and learn about the project and share your input and ask questions. So that's going to be happening this spring. And then after that, oh, and we also have a survey, I forgot to say. We will be putting out a public survey asking about people's opinions and concerns and their preferences and priorities. That will be on a story map. And then we'll have a recap of what the input we heard will be. And when we're ready for our final recommendation and plan, that will also be posted online and publicized and shared with community members. So we know that there's going to be people who are concerned. but we know that there's people who really want this trail to happen. The people who want the trail to happen want access to the waterfront. There is not very many public access points to the waterfront. A place for families, a place to bike and walk safely, a way to access restaurants, parks, and marinas without having to drive your car, and a place to enjoy nature and the scenery, because it really is a very beautiful area. But some of the questions are like, how can impacts be mitigated? There are a lot of different ways, there are a lot of different impacts, and we can talk about that. What are the amenities that can be added? Can we have exercise stations, or can we have scenic outlooks? These are all things that we'll be asking, and they might be asking us, and that we can think about integrating into our trail design. But there's other concerns too, and these are concerns that are going to be things that we have to wrangle with, like safety of trail users near roadways, impacts to private properties, impacts to environmental resources, impacts to property values, which may just be perceived, and security in secluded areas. So these are all issues that we're going to need to have solutions for if we're going to move forward. So we'll have a variety of alignments, and we need to be thinking about how to design these alignments. So there are certain design requirements that we need to do, like state standards and federal standards, and they're listed here. But there's also the stakeholder preferences, because this is going to be a community-driven project. So does our alignment options connect to important origin and destination points? Does it provide a safe and separated path for pedestrians and bicyclists? Does it provide scenic vistas? Does it impact private property? Does it impact sensitive resources? How is that mitigated? And does it impact active farmland? These are all things that we're going to need to resolve. So these are, this is the web of potential alignments today. We have 33 possible segments that could be pieced together individually. And it really uses a variety of locations, either along roadways or along utility easements or through farmland or on the shoulders of larger roadways. And there's pros and cons to all of these. So some of the typologies is along roadways, we could have a side path. The pros are that this is separated from traffic, it's convenient, it's visible, but this will impact right of way, and it will impact environmental resources, and it will have a higher construction cost. We could also repurpose the existing roadways by using the shoulders. Now, not all of the roadways have shoulders that we can do this, but some of them do. Where we just take the shoulders, we add markings and traffic calming and flex posts to delineate that space. So this is going to be much cheaper, and there's not going to be any right-of-way or an environmental impact, but it's close to traffic. We're going to need the State Highway Administration's approval, which is not guaranteed. And this is not really a facility that's for all ages and abilities. There's also a lot of these like little residential roadways. So what we can do, and these are roadways that are narrow, have a small handful of cars every day. Just the people who live on these streets are using these roadways. So we can reuse these roadways as part of our trail alignment and do some traffic calming and add speed humps, add advisory bike lanes, which is what you're seeing in the image here. And it's also a lot cheaper, and there's no right-of-way or environmental impact. And then there's areas of trail that just go off road alignment. And this is going to be a lot more expensive, but this is going to be a nicer experience. You're going to have a lot more scenic views. You are separated from traffic. You have, it's a more direct or shorter path to get to the different destinations, but this is going to be the most expensive and impactful. And then, of course, we've got our shallow marsh wetlands, and we have a couple of options that have a boardwalk that go over them. Again, it's the same issues with right-of-way and cost and environmental impacts when we have these, but it would be beautiful to walk on a boardwalk across the marshlands. And so what we're doing is for every single one of those 33 alignments, we have a sheet that summarizes what the alignments are and what the impacts are. So this is just an example of a side path along Rock Point Drive. And we have a summary of what the total length is, what the total right-of-way impacts are, and then what the environmental impacts are and what the cost is. So this is just over half a mile and it's just over $500,000. Oops, sorry. And so all of this is going to be assessed in our feasibility study. The main things that we need to thinking about are, do we have stakeholder consensus on what we're recommending? Is this going to be something that's affordable to the county? And does it meet our originally intended goals, which is, the access to certain destinations, ability for all users, and opportunities for recreation and scenic vistas and all that kind of stuff. So our feasibility study outline will go through the project background, the methodology, which includes our public engagement, the purpose and need, existing conditions, opportunities and constraints, alternatives considered. So right now we're at that 33 potential segments. What are the performance measures? And then our recommended concept plan, the cost estimate, permitting requirements, and there's going to be a good bit, a phasing plan because it likely won't all happen at once. The funding opportunities, there are a lot of grant opportunities to fund this, and the next steps. And all of this is going to be posted on our story map. And the next steps after that, when the feasibility study is complete, fingers crossed we get a good alignment. We'll continue ongoing public engagement because it's not done. Seek the grant money, appropriate funds, seek developer partnerships because we do think that some private development could build some of these trail segments. Go into preliminary design and permitting, and then final design, construction, trail opening, and celebrate. So that's a wrap up of my study. I really want to thank the Penn State Geodesign team, especially Janet Silvernagel and David Goldberg, my company Mead and Hunt, and my client, the Charles County Department of Planning. Thank you.
All right, thank you, Alicia. That was a very interesting talk. Once again, a great set of slides. So let's open it up to questions. Anybody have questions for Alicia? Looks like you've got one in the chat from Beth.
I'm trying to the chat. Hold on. Wait, I'm going to stop sharing my screen. I think that will help. Okay, chat. Okay, so, from Beth. She says, nice job, Alicia. It sounds like you're familiar with the State College area. Having been an undergraduate student here, you may be familiar with Route 322 corridor project happening here. I know at least one other geodesign student has worked on that. It sounds like the community phase coming soon. I'm guessing, hold on. I just lost my spot. I'm guessing that it will be challenging. Yeah, it's always challenging. The key to community engagement, though, is transparency and honesty and build trust. And if you're hesitant or if you're holding back, then it just makes it that much harder. Do you know if there will be any consultant with other projects like this to try and anticipate some of the public concerns? Oh, do you know if there is or will be any consultation with other projects like this? I'm not sure I know what you're asking. I mean, as a company and in my professional career, I've done many projects like this. I'm taking a slightly different approach with this one using a geodesign process. But I think there's a lot of the concerns that I put in this slide are anticipated concerns. We haven't heard them yet from stakeholders. And it's anticipated because those are things that we've heard on projects that are similar in the past. But it remains to be seen if those are going to be the community's concerns and if they have other different concerns that we didn't anticipate.
Alicia, it looks like Beth may have tried to clarify, saying that proposing multiple routes that affect both rich and poor, et cetera, has,
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, as far as engagement with equity, it's I wouldn't say it's particularly a low income area, and it's not a minority area. It's not linguistically isolated or a community with limited English proficiency. There is some working class level homes, and then there are some nicer vacation homes, or even just nicer permanent homes. So it is a mix. And we are concerned because most of the project boosters are from the more affluent areas. And then a lot of the in-between areas that could be directly impact are more of the working class areas. So we do have a lot of concerns about that. And that's why we're proposing the engagement strategy that we're proposing, is that, you know, we're not saying that there's going to be a trail. We're asking, what do you think about this trail idea? And what are your concerns? And then if it's something that we can work around and resolve as a part of the project, then hopefully we'll be able to do that. But because it's a feasibility study, the end result may be that it's not feasible. And I don't know the answer to that yet, because with any planning process, you can't, you know, we don't know the answer until we go through this process. And if we try to dictate the process to get the answer we're looking for, then the whole process is flawed. The visualization, Dan, yes. Those are meet and hunt graphics that we put together. May have missed in your talk, but is there funding coming from the conduct of the study and then complete the construction? No, the funding at this time is only to do the feasibility study. And then pending the results of the feasibility study, then capital improvement money can be appropriated in the CIP. These things take years. And so, and then we would also, we're recommending to pursue grants. And so grants can typically pay for up to 80% of a project cost. I have a lot of experience as a company and with the county, we have a lot of experience getting grant money. So that can really help make this happen. And the grant money includes money for design, construction, permitting, right of way, engagement, and everything, to 80% of the cost of the project. I really like the web of opportunities. What were the white colored nodes? Oh, I have to give Janet credit for that idea. Those were just the points where the segments met. So they're not really nodes.
Alicia, I have a question.
Yes.
Janet here. So you've definitely given a lot of thought to the potential considerations of the different stakeholder groups and the engagement process. So then when you go through that and you have some conflicting feedback, do you have in mind a process for reconciling conflicting feedback?
Yeah, and if you haven't noticed, I'm sort of expecting it. And really, like when the community came to us and when the county came to us and they presented this whole thing, my first reaction was, oh, that's not going to go as smooth as you think. With any public engagement effort or with any project, when you get a constituency who's opposed to the project, a lot of times they're opposed to the project, but it might be something else that they're upset about. And so it's really important to listen to what people are saying and to have conversations. And you can't necessarily get that from a survey or in a public hearing. And that's another reason why we're doing our fun pop-up event, is because it's not a place where grandstanding will happen. It's a place where we can speak one-on-one with people who are affected. And we're going to widely advertise this event, hope that we get a good audience. But we also understand that not everyone's going to be able to come. And so there's opportunity, or there will be, because we haven't built our website yet. there will be opportunity for people to engage directly by emailing or calling the project team and ask questions. And a lot of times, if people are concerned about, it's important to get to the root of what they're concerned about. And maybe it's security, maybe it's property values, maybe it's conflicts of people using the trail, maybe it's safety, maybe it's just, they just want to be a rural area and keep these tourists away. And so I think these are just conversations we're going to have to see where the root of their concerns are coming from and if there's something that we can solve with this project.
Thanks.
Okay, well, again, excellent job, Alicia. Very, very interesting project. I'm fascinated to see how it comes out. Hopefully something can be done that makes just about everyone happy, and there is an actual trail built someday. All
Fingers
right,
crossed.
yeah, that takes us to our next presenter. We're now going to switch over to a couple of MGIS students. Ryan Wong is next. He's going to give us a climate-related presentation. Ryan, are you ready?
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. Let me share my PowerPoint. It's just a little apologies in advance. I have a little bit of a sore throat, so let me know if I need if you need me to speak up or anything.
Sounds good so far.
All right. All right, it's ready?
Yep, looks great.
Cool. Okay. Hi everyone, my name is Ryan and my presentation will be centered around analyzing the urban heat island effect in the Los Angeles metropolitan area with an emphasis on socioeconomic factors. This capstone project will be taking a look at the urban heat island effect and particularly how it affects certain populations in the Los Angeles area. But it is important to understand what an urban heat island is and why are they so significant from an environmental standpoint. An urban heat island is a metropolitan area that experiences much warmer temperatures than its surrounding areas. There are many factors that contribute to this phenomenon, with the biggest ones being that these urban cities have more impervious surfaces, less vegetation, and more energy consumption than its nearby neighbors. Looking at the biggest urban cities and as they develop, buildings and roads often replace open space and vegetation, and all of these impervious materials from the buildings and roads cause more heat to be trapped and absorbed rather than being reflected back into the atmosphere. As climate change issues seem to be the center of attention, the important question is always, what are ways to stop climate change? There is no simple answer, as fixing this issue is not going to happen overnight. However, there are ways that everyone can help limit and mitigate the effects of climate change. One of these mitigations includes planting trees, as they provide numerous environmental benefits to its surrounding areas. Trees help cool temperatures by providing shade, and other plants and vegetation lower temperatures by going through the processes of evaporation and transpiration, or evapotranspiration for short. It describes the movement of water from land surfaces to plants back to the atmosphere, in which the water vapor cools the air. This got me thinking how in Los Angeles County, where I live, there are regions with an abundance of trees everywhere, and other regions where there are no trees at all. There are very wealthy regions in this area and also extremely poor ones, especially in the center of Los Angeles. A quick Google search showed many articles showing that there were less trees in the poorer neighborhoods and the reasons for it. And I wanted to show with data and maps what these differences in tree coverage look like. So we know that warmer temperatures can affect certain populations of people. And the big question is then, which people and who are affected most by the urban heat island effect? For this project, I wanted to narrow the scope of factors and look directly at tree canopy and vegetation levels, since these vastly vary from city to city in the Los Angeles area. There's also a socioeconomic element when looking at tree coverage, as there is in fact a relationship between the tree coverage and the overall wealth of an area. That will be looked more in depth later in this presentation. To get a good sense of this, American Forests developed a metric called the Tree Equity Score Analyzer, which is used to assess how well a certain area's tree canopy coverage is for its residents. When looking at this tool, it becomes clear that the wealthier neighborhoods have much better scores than the poorer neighborhoods, and the part of the reason for this is that the wealthier neighborhoods can afford to plant trees and take other measures in combating the urban heat island effect. Poorer neighborhoods, unfortunately, do not have this luxury, and is partially why their tree equity scores are so much lower. One of the articles I looked when researching this topic was an opinion piece in the New York Times titled, "Since When Have Trees Existed Only for Rich Americans?" It included pictures of different cities in the United States, with each city showing a rich neighborhood where the median income was around 150,000 to 200,000, and a poorer neighborhood where the median income is around 40,000 to 50,000. These pictures showing the differences in tree canopy coverage is shown on the figure on screen. The grayscale background mixed with the dark green trees provides a great comparison at what tree canopy coverage looks like in richer versus poorer neighborhoods. This made me want to research what Los Angeles County looked like where I live, and knew some cities would be like the ones shown in this figure. So now that we know why tree coverage is so important when looking at the urban heat island effect, there are three main research questions that I want to look at and try to answer. The three research questions are: to what degree does tree coverage predict urban heat island effect in the Los Angeles metropolitan area? To what degree do Hispanic, African American, or Asian American majority cities differ from white majority cities, and how do these differences change over time? As mentioned before, there are many factors that contribute to the urban heat island effect, and by isolating tree canopy coverage, we can find out how big of a factor it is in regards to urban heat islands. For example, should adding tree canopy coverage and vegetation be the single most priority when trying to lower temperatures, or maybe something like green or cool roofs? We know that minority groups have less tree coverage and vegetation in their neighborhoods, but I want to quantify that statistic. Are the differences so significant that we need to invest heavily in adding more green spaces and trees to these neighborhoods? Or like the first research question, should we look elsewhere as the priority? And then the third research question, I want to take a look at how the land use, land cover, as well as temperature have changed over time and try to look for trends in the data. Understanding the trends in the data is important for making the next step possible for mitigation, solutions, and actions. The urban heat island effect is something that will only continue to intensify as climate change rages on, so any effort to lower temperatures, even by a little bit, can go a long way in saving lives. Extreme heat can pose more of a problem to sensitive groups, such as the elderly, who have a tougher time adjusting to hot weather compared to younger adults, and young children who haven't fully developed their bodies yet. Also included in the sensitive group are the lower income populations, as they most likely do not have the best living conditions. More specifically, this can cause illnesses such as heat cramps, heat exhaustion, heat stroke, and hyperthermia. And the older age group with existing health conditions are the most at risk. With this being said, it's important to understand what we know for sure as facts about the urban heat island effect and use those facts to come up with the next steps. So for my data, the first data set I'm using is the race and ethnicity in the United States data set found on Esri based off of 2020 census data. I chose this data set because it gives very detailed race and ethnicity information about the population that is relevant to my project. For every single census tract in the United States, this data set gives population breakdowns by race, income, age groups, as well as projected 2027 estimates, but those won't be used. Something to note going forward will be how to categorize people that are in the 2 or more races population, and that could get a little tricky. So it will be important to devise a strict rule set and stick to it when working with that data. This is an example of what I can show with this data set. This particular one shows the Hispanic population in each census tract, and I could change this map at any time to show a new variable if I wanted to. Having a map like this for all my variables allows me to quickly see and look for trends. For example, the middle of the map represents South Los Angeles, and it has a large Hispanic population compared to its surroundings. For comparisons, it would probably be more helpful to normalize the data as a percentage rather than give total population values, since there will obviously be census tracts that are larger than others. For example, comparing 2 different census tracts, one having a population of 5,000 versus one with 1,000 isn't too helpful, but instead comparing percentages instead of total gives context to the data. The second data set I worked with shows tree canopy levels at census tract level in Los Angeles County. This data was compiled by Tree People and the Center for Urban Resilience at Loyola Marymount University as part of a project that aimed to look at spatial distribution of green infrastructure in the county. Tree People is an environmental advocacy organization that works to make positive changes to our environment through education and volunteering. This data was collected at census tract level as well, and its attribute data included tree canopy existing percentage, tree canopy existing area, and the overall area of each census tract. The figure on the left shows the tree canopy coverage for each census tract in Los Angeles County, with the scale going from light green to dark green, with dark green being the census tract with more tree canopy coverage. The figure on the right shows tree canopy data for 10 random census tracts in the county, just to see what the data set looks like. What I liked about this data set is that it showed which city each census tract is in, so that was helpful for organizational purposes. The main field I use from this data set is the tree canopy existing percent field, with the mean and median tree canopy percentage hovering around 16 to 17%. And this percentage was calculated by taking the tree canopy existing area and dividing that by the area of the census tract. And perhaps the trickiest data set to find and implement, since I haven't used it before, was temperature data. Based off the literature review I carried out, most of the land surface temperature data from studies was either derived from NASA's MODIS sensor or from Landsat 8 imagery. I had more success dealing with and working with Landsat 8 imagery, so I chose to use that to find land surface temperature. Converting a Landsat 8 satellite image into a raster that shows land surface temperature required the use of some complicated math equations, and that will be discussed in the methods section. For this figure, I downloaded a Landsat 8 image of the Los Angeles area from USGS Earth Explorer, probably taken just a month ago, to see if I could successfully display land surface temperature data and if it looked right. Like I said earlier, I've never worked with temperature data like this, so this took a while to complete. The temperature scale on the bottom left is in Celsius and shows a range of -15 to 42 degrees, but those extremes represent obvious areas outside the study area, for example, in the middle of the ocean. I examined the data carefully and found that the highest land surface temperature was around 35 degrees Celsius, and most of the downtown area was 30 degrees or slightly below that, which makes sense. And the lowest land surface temperatures were around -4, -5 degrees Celsius, and they occurred in the mountains where elevations were the highest in the study area and where it's snowing. And yes, it does snow in the mountains, even in the Los Angeles area. And for my project, I would have to pick Landsat images from at least 2 time periods, but it was nice to make sure that I could produce land surface temperature data before getting too far along in the project. For my main analysis, I intend on having 2 parts, one completed in ArcGIS Pro and the other one on eCognition. On ArcGIS Pro, the goal for this is to use all the data I have shown in the previous slides and use that to help answer my 3 research questions introduced in the beginning of the presentation. The first step is figuring out the time frame of my analysis and make sure I can access data for it. Something on the line of at least 10 years would provide enough time in between to show changes in land cover. I then plan on mapping out all of my variables by census tract, for example, tree canopy coverage, population by different races, and try to determine if tree coverage can be used to predict the urban heat island effect based on these variables and to what degree. For that, I can use a regression-based analysis to model these relationships. Regression-based analysis will allow me to see how other independent variables impact the dependent variable of tree coverage. Something like using geographically weighted regression, GWR, could be an option, and since GWR works better with large data sets and is something that I've completed before in the past. To calculate land surface temperatures on ArcGIS Pro, I downloaded bands 4, 5, 10, and the metadata from the Landsat 8 imagery. Bands 4 and 5 are used to calculate the normal difference vegetation index, or NVDI for short. And then band 10 is used to calculate the top of atmosphere spectral radiance, or TOA for short. TOA gets converted into brightness temperature using the K1 and K2 constants on the right, which were found in the metadata. As for the NDVI, that gets converted into ground emissivity, and then land surface temperature gets calculated with an equation using both emissivity and TOA. The flowchart for this process is on the figure on the left, and all the formulas will be included in the final project. For the second part of my method section, and to get a better picture of these changes, I intend on completing an object-based classification on eCognition for 2 time periods, and it will allow me to see what land cover classes have changed over time. The main land cover classes evaluated would be grass, vegetation, trees, buildings, roads, pavements, and water. As cities become more developed, grass, vegetation, and trees might make way for buildings and roads, and completing an object-based classification will allow us to quantify the amount of change in the area. I haven't decided on the specifics of this study area, like if I wanted to see one giant region, or maybe look more in depth in pockets of smaller spaces where it's easier to see land cover changes. And as for my anticipated results, I believe that growing up in Los Angeles County and being familiar with the area, I can say that when looking at the urban heat island effect, tree and vegetation coverage will be one of the most important factors. Without diving too far in the data, it is clear that the poor neighborhoods and communities have way fewer trees than the richer areas. it would be nice to identify those areas that need help the most and maybe push for action to be taken so that residents there suffer less from the heat. As far as land use and land cover, I think that overall on a broad scale, there won't be too much of a difference between the changes in major land cover classes like impervious surfaces and then trees, grass, and vegetation. It would make sense that as time goes on, the number of impervious surfaces increases, maybe ever so slightly, since more development has taken place. It'll be interesting to zoom in on individual cities to see if on a smaller scale, maybe there are some areas that have changed drastically. And that was the end of my presentation. Any comments or questions?
All right, very good. Thanks, Ryan. That's a very interesting talk, and again, I'm curious to see how your results will turn out. Questions for Ryan? While we wait, I had one. I was a little confused. At first I thought you were going to be using the tree data that you talked about earlier in your talk, as showing where all the trees were located. But then later on, it seemed like you were going to be using satellite imagery to classify, do a land cover analysis and classify the areas that were tree covered. Can you clarify that for me?
Yeah, so I think for the land use, land cover, that's kind of one part of my analysis, to show, like looking at the percentage of trees over time, from one area to another. It kind of gives just a little context on, if let's say the number of trees goes down in the area from like 15% to 10, you could tell just by that land use and land cover that the temperature's probably going to increase in that area. So it just gives at least the land use, land cover just gives a little bit more context of what I'm trying to figure out.
Okay, so the tree data set, is that, do you have snapshots in time of what the tree coverage looked like, or is it a one-time one snapshot data set, or how's it look?
Yeah, it was a one-time, at least the one I've found so far is a one-time snapshot, taken from a few years ago. So
Okay.
around 2020.
Okay. Looks like you've got a question in the chat.
Have you explored data the Weather Service may have? I have not explored data from the Weather Service, but yeah, I'll look into that. Capital land cover data set like NLC. Yeah, I guess kind of like a land cover data set, or I guess running it on eCognition is kind of like another way of looking or figure out land cover. Probably give me more data, or how should I say, like I could look at the data and make analysis of that rather easily.
I was just clarifying Ryan's question a little bit. Just neither of us has done an urban heat island effect analysis before. And so the paper we're basing the methodology on uses Landsat to do this. So that's the reason for following that. There probably are other data sources that would work as well, but just to not have to reinvent the wheel on how to do the sort of change analysis for that.
Well, thank you for your question, Ryan. Oh, thank you, Daniel.
Could you go ahead and read that?
Oh, what Daniel said?
Yes, or
Yeah.
everybody. Sure.
He said it would be interesting to see your results compared to some environmental justice data like CAL and ViroScreen. Great job.
Other questions for Ryan, questions or comments? Okay, well, if not, I wish you luck on this project, Ryan. Again, I find it to be a really interesting topic myself, and we'll be looking forward to seeing what you come up with.
Thank you very much.
All right, that brings us to our last presenter for today, Megan Fowler. Megan's going to talk to us about dashboard development. Megan, are you ready?
I am ready. I'm going to go ahead
Okay.
and share my screen.
Let me just put in one more reminder to everyone to be filling out the evaluation form. I posted the link to it once again right after Ryan finished up. But Megan, I can see your screen now, so why don't you take it away?
All right, perfect. Hello, everyone. My name is Megan. I am the wastewater superintendent for a small town on the Eastern Shore of Maryland. And today I'm going to be talking to you about PB Dash. I have worked in the water and wastewater industry for about 18 years now. About 5 years ago, I completed the post-baccalaureate certificate in GIS here at Penn State. And I returned about a year and a half ago to complete the Master of GIS. My capstone project revolves around the lead and copper rule revision from the EPA and designing a dashboard to assist public water systems with managing the replacement of lead service lines. Here is a little overview of my presentation. So I'm going to start off by asking you if you know what is in your water. We're all aware that lead is a neurotoxin and there is no safe amount of lead exposure. According to the CDC, lead can enter drinking water when corrosion causes wearing away of metal from lead pipes or plumbing fixtures. Lead in water can come from homes with lead service lines that connect the home to the main water line. Some drinking water fountains with lead lined tanks may also have lead in the water. Children and pregnant women are most at risk to the negative health effects of lead exposure, including damage to the brain and nervous system, slowed growth and development, learning and behavior problems, hearing and speech problems. While lead quickly enters the blood, exposure can be difficult to see. Once the lead exposure stops, the amount of lead in the blood decreases only gradually. Some is released through urine and sweat, while some is actually stored in the bones, and it can take decades for lead to be decreased and expelled that way. So preventing lead exposure is important for the health and the safety of our entire community. This brings us to the lead and the copper rule. All public water systems in the United States are governed by the US EPA and must follow the lead and copper rule, which has been through several revisions since its original implementation in 1991, and governs water utilities to act responsibly to remediate lead infrastructure from the drinking water distribution system. Specifically, the lead and copper rule gives public water systems guidance on how to comply with various components of the rule, including sample site collection, collection procedure, and public outreach. The LCR established a maximum contaminant lead level goal of 0. However, it does not require public water systems to make any changes to the distribution system or the treatment process unless they reach the action level above 15 parts per billion. Public water systems compare sample results from homes to EPA's action level. And if 10% of those samples have water concentrations that are greater than 15 parts per billion, then the system must perform actions such as public education and lead service line replacement. This 10% of the samples, this rule is known as the 90% threshold. So those public water systems that exceed the action level for this 90% threshold are required to take corrective measures to prevent lead from leaching into the water supply. That can include corrosion control treatment, again, public education, or actually removing a lead line. Requirements that public water systems maintain a lead line service inventory or follow-up samples or additional actions if a sample exceeds 15 parts per billion presently don't exist. So here's a snippet of a consumer confidence report for the town of Berlin, Maryland. This is known as the CCR within the water industry. And it's something that's published every year. It's a document for public water systems to communicate to consumers the quality of their water. So as a consumer, you have the right to know what's in the water that's being provided to you. The CCR has an overview of regulated contaminants in the water and at what level they're present in your system and in your drinking water. There's also some verbiage to provide education and contact information should you have additional questions for the water system. You can see here, this document outlines the lead level in the water. So if you haven't seen this document before and you're connected to a public water system, I encourage you to get in touch with them and get a copy. You can see in the red circle here that Berlin has a lead level of 5.5 parts per billion in their water, which is below the action level. So the latest revision of the lead and copper rule was released in 2021, is known as the lead and copper rule revision, and encourages public water systems to take a more aggressive and proactive approach toward lead abatement. While future revisions to the LCRR are still anticipated, systems are doing their best to meet current guidance and prepare for full compliance of the latest revision. The latest revision will involve a high level of commitment from systems and require resources that some systems may not currently have available. This image shows an illustration of possible sources of lead within the water service line and plumbing fixtures within your home. So you can see around numbers 1 and 2, the water main and the service line heading into a property where the curb stop is shown. There's usually a water meter in that area, and inside the home can include any faucet or any shower head fixtures or anything like that. So there are several takeaways from the lead and copper rule revision. To summarize, I'm going to go over 6 of them here. First, the standard sampling procedures have been updated. Previously, the lead and copper rule followed a 1st liter sampling standard. What this standard means is that water must sit stagnant for at least 6 hours in the water line. So we usually collect this sample first thing in the morning. That's before you brush your teeth, before you flush the toilet, before you get a shower. We want the very first draw of sample that's coming out of your faucet first thing in the morning. So the lead and copper rule revision includes a more robust sampling procedure where requirements depend on the material of the water service line. So if a home does not have a lead service line, we're going to collect the 1st liter draw of water, just like we've always done. However, if a home has a lead service line, samples must be collected in the same fashion, but will include both the 1st liter draw of water and the 5th liter draw of water. So this is going to give us a larger volume of water to test and would have a greater chance of being representative of the quality or maybe the contamination of the water that's in the system. Another change to the sampling procedure or sampling standard is that the lead and copper rule revision defines a trigger level of 10 parts per billion. So if a system were to reach the trigger level of 10 parts per billion, they would be required to perform additional planning, monitoring, treatment, or public education. Second, the lead and copper rule did not have any specific requirements for follow-up samples after a high level reading. So in the lead and copper rule revision, verification of samples are required within 30 days. So if we get a high level reading, we're going to have to go back out within 30 days and double check that that was an accurate reading. So if the action level goes further, if you reach the 10 parts per billion trigger level, you will have to implement additional planning and monitoring. If the level goes further to the 15 parts per billion action level, remediation would have to take place. So here we have an illustration of the first liter draw of water taken from a faucet inside the home. And you can see that the 5th liter draw of water is aiming to sample water a little further into the service line. Third, the lead and copper rule aims to better protect children and communities from the risks of lead exposure. For the first time, the EPA is prioritizing testing in schools and childcare facilities by requiring public water systems to conduct sampling at 20% of elementary schools and 20% of childcare facilities each year. The only exclusion to this is if the facility was built after 2014. So fourth, and this might be the biggest takeaway of the lead and copper rule revision, is that all public water systems will be required to create an inventory of water service lines within their system. And this has to take place by October 2024. Each system will be required to identify and make public the locations of lead service lines, and will have to inform customers annually if they're served by a lead service line. Many systems have analog records and they're all over the place. Some of them are missing. Some of them are going to be from permit records or as-built or engineering drawings. Some information may have to be collected from property owners or old school hand drawn maps that our operators have in their notebooks from 10, 20 years ago. So the lead service line inventory will also need to be updated annually. As you can tell, it's going to be an interesting process just to gather that information. So here's a photo of a lead gooseneck or pigtail. Typically, these short pieces of lead pipe have been used to connect a galvanized service line to the water main. Quite often, in my experience, I see 3 or 4 of them together connecting the water main to one service line. According to the principles of data science for lead service line inventories, substantial uncertainty still surrounds the nation's water systems regarding the number and locations of lead service lines. And I think now maybe you can understand why. So this inventory pushes systems to go beyond any previous requirement, as we'll also need to record not only the service line on the public side of the meter, but also on the private or property owner's side as well. And that's a part of the water distribution system that is historically never been maintained or addressed by a public water system. So fifth, the lead and copper rule revision has set a goal for systems to replace 3% of lead service lines per year. Where historically systems have been responsible for only the public system side of the meter, now we're going to have to replace the full service line if we can, and that includes the private side of the meter. So this is going to be another challenge by creating an accurate inventory that's going to require public engagement to collect information on private property. In any case, if a homeowner were to come to a public water system and say, hey, I'm replacing my service line, then the public water system would be required to also replace their side within 45 days. The sixth takeaway that we have is that public water systems will need to provide property owners with a pitcher, filter, and cartridges for at least 6 months following a replacement. And this is to help reduce the impact of any disturbance of the line that could potentially or adversely introduce more lead into the water service line after construction. So overall, the lead and copper rule revision outlines some really admirable goals, and it's long past time we set this goal as a collective, but we need the tools to get there. So this comes into play, PB dash. This project will assist public water systems in 3 important ways. First, the project will help geographically visualize the material of water service lines within a public water system, water distribution system. Often, public water systems operate based on historical memory, not necessarily formal records. This is especially true for small systems. Second, this project will assist public water systems who are working towards compliance with the lead and copper rule revision lead service line inventory requirement by creating a living database for service line material. Third, the project will help public water systems prioritize properties for lead service line replacement while providing a picture of replacements over time and tracking progress towards compliance goals. In order to accomplish these 3 goals and comply with the revision, a customized dashboard called PB Dash will be created. Developing PB Dash and making it publicly available will also offset costs associated with a water system hiring outside specialists to assist with designing and building such a dashboard. So this dashboard will give the operator hands-on control over their data and will allow them to use their own knowledge of the water distribution system and the decision-making process. To ensure public health and safety of the water distribution system, the typical public water system operator has many tasks and responsibilities to complete, but they're not necessarily well-versed in the use or application of technology. So creating this dashboard in a simple way is vital for an operator. Overarching goals then for this project are to design a dashboard with application-specific tools, an intuitive user interface, and useful data visualizations in one convenient place. Initially, PB Dash will be used by my department to validate results and obtain some user feedback. Following the consideration of any adjustments, it will be considered for deployment to other public water systems. This literature review focuses on the general design and operation of dashboards. Cited literature provides information relevant to the consideration of gauges and metrics to optimize usefulness and interpretation of data provided. It also looks at functionality of the dashboard and how the user might be able to customize data views for investigation. Elias and Bizarianos explain that dashboards offer an intuitive environment for dynamically creating, rearranging, searching, and exploring multiple visual data representations from diverse data sources. They further discuss the importance of dashboards for novice users who can see their customizations become active immediately, the essentiality of an easy creation process, and the promotion of learning. They also add that data filters can be added to provide users with the capability to alter the display of their data, both globally, meaning the entire dashboard, or locally, meaning only one component of the dashboard, and can allow comparison of data among different categories. According to Here et al., the vast majority of novice visualization users act as consumers. They will interact with the visualization within the possibilities offered, but will rarely extend existing functionality to suit their analysis needs. This is important because novice users will need the dashboard display to optimize functionality to be able to digest and interact with the information available. They further emphasize the importance of providing a set of sensible defaults for data and view parameters, and emphasize the importance of providing contextual information such as legends, scales, labels, pop-ups, titles, and any explanation of visual mappings. Coley and Jaco discuss the concept of a web-based dashboard to allow easy access to data with intelligent capabilities for filtering information in an interactive way. They make comparisons to smartphone applications and commercial financial websites that allow users to visually summarize information and then analyze it in more detail. Alio, who evaluated dashboard design and use, points out that most dashboards suffer poor linkage with actual strategy and are overcrowded with indicators or key metrics that reflect progress on implementing strategy. Alio's evaluation magnifies the importance of simplicity and functionality in the data indicators that are provided. They point out that the best dashboards limit the indicators to the most powerful 10 or 15. Too many can be overwhelming for the user to interpret. Alio goes on to point out that the lack of context for indicators weakens the dashboard's impact and makes the results difficult to interpret. This drives home the importance of providing contextual information for metrics and indicators as discussed by here et al. It is also important to provide information that includes what data is being referenced for indicators such as ratios, graphs, etc., for the user to fully understand and digest the metrics that are available. Here we have a dashboard that is most of us are accustomed to in our daily lives. However, it is overcrowded with far too many indicators to interpret at one time. Without careful consideration to the indicators that will be used, the function of the dashboard can be polluted. So per guidance from the EPA, public water systems will need to inventory water service lines within their water distribution network as lead, galvanized requiring replacement, non-lead, or lead status unknown. To accomplish this, operators will need a reasonable way to visualize their water distribution system. According to Kammerhofer, for occasional or novice users, full-fledged desktop GIS are far from being intuitive pieces of software. With this in mind, PB- will serve as a landing page providing system operators with important and useful information that will be used to manage the replacement of lead service lines in the water distribution system. Much of the planning behind the design of PB- stems from guidance presented by the EPA in dashboard design guidance for water quality surveillance and response systems. Specifically, it discusses several features for consideration to the design of the dashboard. I will discuss 4 of them as the most useful for compliance with the lead and copper rule revision. First, it discusses how geospatial presentation of data takes advantage of spatial attributes and is a particularly valuable feature of a dashboard as it provides a spatial context to interpret data. This figure depicts a spatial representation of any town, USA. The design of PB- will allow the public water system operator the ability to interact with a map of parcels within the distribution system and view the associated attributes. This interactivity will allow them the ability to easily click on a parcel and investigate or edit information within its accompanying attribute table, such as the confirmed waterline material, date that the waterline was replaced, laboratory sample results, or dispersal of water filters. Being able to view and interact with the attributes will help operators keep the service line data organized by service address, aid in interpretation of the data, and assist in the lead and copper rule revision compliance. Second, it discusses demonstrating trends over time in a time series plot is useful where the time scale can be varied to present the data values over different periods of time. For example, this figure shows a graph of time series data representing chlorine residual as compared to control limits within a water distribution system. PB- will include visualizations of time series data, which is useful when tracking the number of completed service line replacements, as well as dispersal of water filters, and even cost of service line replacement over time. Third, it summarizes the importance of other visualizations of data. For example, the use of a gauge is effective for monitoring current conditions of multiple parameters. As you can see here, this presentation of data will be most useful in the PB- interface for visualizing aggregated laboratory results of pre-construction and post-construction samples against the action level and trigger level. The EPA goes on to explain that when dealing with smaller data sets, tables or bar graphs can be useful to visualize laboratory data for maybe individual service lines instead of the full system. Fourth, it discusses the importance of using appropriate symbology and thematic mapping techniques in dashboard design. This image depicts an example of thematic mapping using symbology to represent different data variables for the user. Unique symbols represent different variables, where varied colors of the same symbol represent differing data values for the same variable. Extending beyond the EPA recommendations, the design of PB- will also include information such as compliance goal or number of service lines needing replacement to maintain a 3% yearly average, number or percentage of lines that have been replaced over time, and total number of service connections. This information will be useful as an indicator of monitoring status of the overall lead service line replacement project. For example, this figure shows an example of PB-'s geospatial display and the use of circles of different colors to represent data categorizing service line material. Colors have been chosen using a sequential color scheme so that a darker color draws attention to services categorized as lead, and a lighter color represents services categorized as not lead. Colors used are also colorblind safe to be more easily interpreted by users with color blindness. The PB- dashboard's design will have intuitive functionality that navigates the operator through the interface, such as flashing the location on the map when the coordinating attribute is clicked on the table or vice versa. There will also be multiple base map options to assist the user. Other useful functions will be a search feature, a measurement tool, the ability to pan across the map to zoom in or out, and easy selection of single or multiple points at one time that will also synchronize with the table display. Customized pop-ups for each location will provide details that aren't immediately provided on the table, such as property owner and contact information. According to Cully et al., water utility managers are asked to make increasingly complex decisions about prioritizing financial, labor, and equipment resources to meet system performance and budget expectations. PB- will be a useful tool for public water systems to use in prioritizing funding and resources to remediate lead service lines from the water distribution system. PB- will allow public water system operators to have hands-on control of the replacement of lead service lines from start to finish, allowing them to update data as they go while creating a comprehensive inventory of water service lines within their utility. Having an easy-to-use and access tool can assist utilities in project planning, budgeting, and obtaining grant funding to move forward. In order to create PB-, I will first create a set of data to be displayed based on the town of Berlin, Maryland. This data set will include attributes for property address, water service line on both the public water system and private side of the water meter, as well as pre-construction and post-construction water samples. Additional data will include owner contact information, lead service line remediation cost, distribution of water filters, and the method used to identify service line material. With this data set, I will create a map using ArcPro and publish it as a web map to ArcGIS online. Then I will create and design PB- using Esri's dashboard builder to customize visualizations and functionality. The image on this slide is portraying a prototype of PB- of the PB- interface design. I'm still exploring the interface and things that I may or may not include, so I expect this to be altered as I move forward. As far as the timeline, I'm hoping to develop the inventory this summer, and late summer, early fall, start working on creating the user interface. By fall, I'd like to be able to test the performance of the dashboard with my own team and prepare and submit an abstract for review to be publicized in Rural Water Journal. Thank you for attending. Do you have any questions?
All right, thanks, Megan. Nice job. It's a really big, there's a lot of a wide-ranging effect of the legislation that you're talking about. You're going to start with one small community, but I think if your dashboard is well done, it could have could be adopted in lots of communities. So I hope that's the kind of thing that happens. Question for Megan. Any questions for her? I'll start. I noticed you had this in your timeline, but didn't specifically address it. What kind of role do you see user testing playing in your project?
I have reached out to about 10 utilities within the state of Maryland for some feedback on design and what kind of information they might like to see or what kind of data they might like to work with. I haven't heard back from any of them. And so because of that, I anticipate working with my own team here at the town of Berlin and getting user input and designing something that's going to work for us, and then considering distributing it to other utilities.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, hopefully you do get some get responses from other utilities so that you can make sure that you're addressing everything that should be in there.
Yeah, I agree.
Looks like you've got a couple questions in the chat.
What kind of security concerns have you considered for users, public customers, and oversight entities? Do you mean regarding sharing water infrastructure location?
Okay, I'll answer that. I can ask it quicker than I can speak.
Okay.
I was talking about the whole as far as excuse me, different entities accessing the PB database, because you'll have suppliers, water suppliers entering information in. You'll have display, public display is, view and only. Plus you always have, you would always have, oversight entities actually looking at for enforcement and oversight. So, do you see just, having logins with different concerns, logins with different capabilities in the software, or, who is going to be the administrator of the actual each one of the local dashboards?
Okay, I think I know where you're coming from. I have not really considered security concerns in that aspect. I think I kind of visualize it being used in-house and only the utility having login information for that. But as far as sharing the data with the public, that will have to be taken into consideration with the best way to do that to preserve security of the water system.
Correct. So, and that's all I was asking about, because this is really a great, it's really a great tool, but I can see people asking for more and more, and and things like that. So
Yeah,
that's really, really important.
thank you. That's a good point of view. There's another question from Daniel. Will the PB dashboard be designed primarily for a desktop or tablet? Do you foresee it also to be used on a phone out in the field? What I'm thinking, or what I'm visualizing, is to be used on a tablet or phone. Our utility here has iPads, and so we're hoping that we can give the operator an iPad at the beginning of the day, and they can update data as they go. That way information doesn't get written down on paper and lost or misinterpreted and input later by someone else. It can kind of be done right on the spot. And there's less likely chance of forgetting data or missing data that way. Another question, as Remade led services inventory solution, are you going to use their schema in the dashboard, or are you using your own? I have briefly explored Esri's led service inventory solution. I found it kind of confusing. So from that sense, I'm kind of using my own. I have explored other companies that have come up with some different solutions as far as not necessarily dashboards, but having a map, a published map of their infrastructure or their service line material, not necessarily the infrastructure itself. So I have a few ideas on how I'd like to take pieces of that and implement it in our own dashboard here. Another question, if using mobile devices, there may be a need for operators to upload and store images. That's a great idea. In the past, we've taken pictures of things and, you know, they're stuck on your phone for life. They're never filed appropriately and you don't know what the picture is of in 2 months' time. So being able to take a picture of it and tie it to a particular service would be really useful. Another question, in Esri solution, they developed a self-test workflow based on survey 123 to engage the public. Is there any plan in incorporating the self-test possibility? We are considering the option of implementing some kind of survey for the public as far as reporting the public side, the private property side material for each service address. But not sure that that is going to be a separate entity item or included in the dashboard at this point.
All right. Well, again, very good job, Megan. And I wish you the best of luck in actually implementing your project. Hope
Thank
it
you.
goes well. So that brings us to the end of today's presentations. As always, this was a great set of engaging talks across a range of topics. Just a reminder, please fill out the peer review form for today's presenters. I just pasted the link in one more time. With that, thanks to everyone for attending and best of luck to all the students working on their capstones on completing your work and finishing your degrees. Have a good day, everyone.